Hello and welcome to a new episode of DaaCast, the exhibition series. We're currently sitting at the Can You See Me exhibition, and I'm here with Manon Steyaert.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk a little bit about your practice, your works, the works that obviously we have in the exhibition, but your practice as a whole.
Yeah.
So if you want to give me a little bit of background maybe about what you've done, how you started with this practice that you have ongoing with the silicone, and then obviously now going into canvas.
Yeah, so I'm a visual artist, as you can see. I've been a full-time practicing artist since 2019. I finished a master's at Chelsea in fine art, and originally I had a bit of background in fashion back when I was 17, quite a while ago. And that sense of being obsessed with materials has really fed into the practice. So you know, started out just discovering painting, gestural abstraction, and then more diving into the structural element of painting and kind of recognizing the frame as part of the work. So seeing painting more as a sculpture, and that, you know, ricocheted further into seeing, you know, how to drape onto canvas. And the draping very much came as an influence from fashion in that sense of draping on the body. And the further and further I go into my practice, it's very much about perception of painting and sculpture and creating a work that is in between the two. Because I wasn't formally trained in sculpture, so I used, you know, my painting background, my painting knowledge to create sculptures. And I think me being myself and like impatient, I think painting for me just didn't quite work. That I always wanted to create something from scratch as well. So silicon came out of a lot of errors actually with latex, and you know, it degrades much quicker than silicon, and that's how I came onto silicon as my predominant material that you can see behind us. And it wasn't satisfying to me in the flat surface, so it didn't really attract my eye. It didn't make me wonder or curious whilst viewing my own work. So I was much more interested in the sense of creating it in a 3D format, so draping to get these beautiful undulations, these curves, these quite feminine curves that you can see within the works. And it's also very much related back to the language of drapery and the imagination within the folds in the old master paintings.
Which you also take inspiration from. I remember you were talking about, maybe specifically, I remember I recently came to your studio and we were taking inspiration from a specific old masters and how semi-transparent maybe the flowy dresses were.
So not only am I interested in the drapery in those, you know, old master paintings, I think the time that you're talking about, it was Lord Frederick Leighton and Alma Tamida, those two paintings. You have the Flaming June.
That one. I remember we were talking about.
It's also the colors that are used in those drapings, and you know, through different times in terms of, you know, the Italian old masters to, you know, the Dutch. It's very different in the way that they see material. Also the French and the Romanticism, and so I'm more interested in the fabric when it's very much floating around the body. And, you know, I've started to see my works a little bit more as the surface and the structure in paintings. Like, is the surface kind of almost female, and is the structure, you know, more rigid, more masculine in that sense? And I wanted to embody that femininity that I've been finding in, even though it's the male painters, is in the figures that are painted and the gorgeous, you know, fabrics that are covering and uncovering them. Is that sense of how much do you show, how much do you reveal to the viewer. And so that the transparency in that color palette was very much inspired by those two painters and their works and their drapery, and also the two here, Cover Your Eyes. It's a play on the title as well, in terms of covering your eyes for a game of hide and seek, which was the solo show where I first showed these two works. And as you can see, there's a little bit of transparency within the color, and it's that sense of you being able to almost see through the painting further,
especially on the being that they're both two colors. On the yellow ones, they're a bit more transparency, and then covered a bit more in the darker tones. And then there are some other works of yours where you have a layer of canvas behind, and maybe you paint that more, and then you put the layer of silicone on top, which is a bit more transparent to let the painting of the canvas come through. So that's, I'm assuming, also a bit of inspiration from the colors of those old masters.
Yeah, so that is those works that I've done. I am going to continue them because I find them really interesting. Is the sense of really involving both painting and sculpture, quite literally both into the work, whereas these are very much perception of what a painting and a sculpture is. So those works, it's a real bounce back between the two mediums that I quite like. They're talking to each other in quite an interesting way. Sculpture is covering painting, and painting's trying to come out. But with the play of color, it seems they're vibrating together, which is something that I really find interesting. That marriage of two mediums.
Yeah. And now with the new experimentation that we also have two works of in the show, now you're playing more with the drapery of the canvas itself and the folding of it. So still resembling this folding and drapery of the silicone, but with the medium of canvas.
Yeah. Well, so people always ask me, it's like, why draping? And I think also it's not just the act of draping that I love, it's also the line that it creates. And that sense of, I want you to get lost in the work. I want you to be able to see it 2 different days and see a completely different work because you're analyzing a different thing. And also to get lost within it, that sense of not illusionistic, but a little bit, in the sense of you're following a continuous line, and between the reflection of light more in the silicon works, but with the canvas works, it's very much that draping that is coming in and out. And almost, trans kind of like, trance-like, going, continuous in that sense of just appreciating to look and to be present in the act of looking.
Yeah, which I guess whenever you look at your work, depending also on as you mentioned, the light that's hitting it, depending on the time of day or where you position it, also because of the many folds that your works have, you might discover new parts. Or maybe it moves because obviously it doesn't move because you've obviously placed it as you want it to be placed, but it's soft. It's a soft material.
Yeah. So it has an idea, like a sense of almost like liquidity. So I think there is movement present in them, just because of the way they'll react with light, anyways. But I think there is movement within the work in the sense of the drapes and the kind of rounded shapes, the undulations. Yeah, well, it looks soft. I think that's also what's interesting about your works, where sculpture might always be tied to something that's obviously you're not supposed to touch, and it's probably made of something like a hard material. Yours are almost I almost want to touch them, and because they obviously with the shimmer as well, and knowing that it's silicone, you can imagine that the touch is quite soft. Yeah, well, I mean, silicone is, when I was working with latex, I was kind of against the connotations of it being sexual. And then that was all the way at the start. And as I've gone further into my practice, I actually kind of invite or appreciate those connotations, because when you're a process-based artist, you're always going to fall at the mercy of your material, because it's a dynamic relationship between artists and materials. So I quite enjoy seeing that reflection of just when it's sensual, it's a sense of desire to look, to maybe touch, to something that's not quite your norm, or, that you feel like it's a little bit like, oh no, I shouldn't, but I want to. It's that sense of desire that I actually really like as well in the work. It's that sense of wanting to touch, but that you can't because you're in an art gallery, and when you do touch it, it's something completely different than what you thought it was going to be. And also just the correlation between it being such an industrial material, taken completely out of its norm into these silicon sheets that I create, and then it becomes very intimate, which I quite like, my studio, in comparison to replicating silicon is a thing to replicate something else, an object, whereas me, it's like it's becoming the surface, it's becoming its own thing, which I really love.
Yeah, it becomes like the material where you focus your art. So you turn something that's completely, it has a completely different meaning for the purpose it's been created or done, and you turn it into art, which is always taking it out of context in a elegant manner. Which actually, mentioning about your practice and obviously the use of silicon, it would be interesting to talk a little bit about the science of it, and maybe, if you will,
the process.
The process, because again, by having been to your studio, you've told me a little bit about it, and there's like this space on the floor that you use, and you pour it and you mix it, so it's a whole process in itself. You create what it's like a painter that mixes their own paints and everything.
I mean, as I said, as my practice is very intuitive, it's process driven. So the process itself is pretty much at the center, and it involves my body quite a lot, which I like, because I feel that I need to almost be a worker towards my pieces. I don't feel a sense of satisfaction if I haven't made it from scratch. That sense of working for it. I think if it's too easy, I don't like it. And so for silicon, it's very much of a chemical curing process. So my studio has to be clean, can't have much dust. And I have a flooring that is made out of perspex. So silicon copies pretty much anything that it will be set in or pushed on, when it cures. If it were to be on jeans, for example, it would replicate that pattern. So for me, I want it shiny, so it has to be perspex floor. And then I mix the colors, and over the couple of years, I've really gotten further into color and mixing color. And it's quite interesting because the pigments used with silicon are very specific. It's like if I used ink, it would be using oil and water. It would never really mix very well. So the pigments, I only have like the primary colors basically and some flesh colors. So it's taken me quite a while to get the tones of color. To understand color in that way has been really eye-opening, and it's been really enjoyable. It's been a pain in the ass too, because it is actually really hard to do. It's like I have this whole new appreciation, when I see color in the natural world, I'm like, oh God, replicating that would be really hard, but it's really catching my eye. So communicating that color over into silicon is also quite interesting. And it's the process of being pushed into directions on the floor. It's active. It hurts my back, but it's really pushing me to, work with the material and, have that physical, that physical and dynamic relationship. And then you have to just wait until it cures. And then the draping is either really fun or really difficult. I could spend quite a while doing it, and it is, your arms, when they're kept up at quite a height for a while, it's that sense of working for it that I love.
Great. And what do you have maybe planned for the near future? What projects are you working on? What's next?
Well, so as I said before, I kind of want to continue in the series of transparencies, that femininity that I want to push forward in the work, and with the painting behind. Just that sense of that extra confusion I want to kind of put onto the viewer, and then also explore the canvas works a little bit more. So I was in a residency for 3 months in Berlin. I really enjoyed making those works, because the way that, the canvas, I would almost flip over my body. It was again a really interesting, physical process that I really enjoyed, and I just need to explore them a little bit more, maybe a different material. With sculpture, you always have to think a little bit deeper, because you have, gravity is working against you. So it's always something to work on. And then I have a couple of shows, art fairs happening, and I'm really looking forward to those as well.
Great. Can't wait to see them. Well, thank you so much for being here with me, for exhibiting in the exhibition.
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to this episode. Okay.